I was never much of a hunter growing up, but over the years I guess I just picked it up. It was mostly to clear my head. That's why I headed out last fall to this spot my buddy told me about, way up north, where he'd said he'd seen some of the biggest bucks around. It was early afternoon, still a bit chilly but sunny enough. Leaves had mostly fallen and the branches looked all twisted up. Anyway, I'd been out there a few hours just walking, keeping an eye out. Then, just up ahead through the trees, I saw something. A buck lying on the ground. Now, I've hunted a fair bit, but this was different. Usually they're alert, looking around, or they'll bolt the second they sense you. But this one didn't move. I thought maybe it was dead, that someone else had left it there, or it had been sick and just died. So I did what any hunter would do. I crept up on it. Rifle ready, steps slow, barely even breathing. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange. This buck wasn't dead. No, it was breathing, just real shallow, like it was barely hanging on. The rise and fall of its chest were so faint you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. I was only a few feet away when it suddenly lifted its head, just a little, and looked right at me. Then it whispered my name. You know when you feel every hair on your neck stand straight up? That was me in that second. My blood turned ice cold, my hands went numb, and I swear I just froze there. Because in that moment, hearing it, my own name, whispered in this breathy, hollow voice, I knew this wasn't right. I didn't even stop to think. I backed up a few steps, turned around, and just ran. I wasn't thinking about where I was going. I just knew I needed to put distance between me and whatever that was. I ran and ran until I couldn't hear anything behind me. Finally, I stopped, leaning against a tree, panting so hard I thought my chest would burst. The silence had come back, but it wasn't comforting anymore. It was too quiet, almost like the forest was listening. After I caught my breath, I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks. The woods can do that, right? I tried to get rid of the creepy feeling, just a weird thing, probably nothing. So I started walking again, this time heading back the way I came, ready to call it a day. But as I was making my way through a clearing, something caught my eye again, off in the distance. There it was, the buck. This time it was standing, just watching me. And I knew, without a doubt, that it was the same one. Don't ask me how, I just knew. It had this way about it, the same sunken look in its eyes, like it was staring right into me. I wanted to turn and leave, but something held me there for a second longer than it should have. We just stared at each other like we were both waiting for the other to make a move. Eventually, I tore myself away and kept going, my steps a little faster, trying not to look back. But after a while, curiosity got the better of me. I figured I was far enough away that it wouldn't still be there. So, I looked back. And there, in the distance, was a figure. Not the buck this time, but something worse. It was tall, way too tall to be anything I'd ever seen, with long, tangled hair draped down to its shoulders, just hanging there like wet moss. It was just standing there, watching me, swaying ever so slightly. Then, as if it knew I'd spotted it, it raised one hand and waved, real slow, like it had all the time in the world. That was it for me. My legs took off before I even realized what I was doing. I ran like I've never run in my life, branches whipping against my face, roots catching at my feet. I didn't care if I tripped or hurt myself, I just needed to get to my car, get the hell out of there. The whole way, I felt like something was right behind me, closing in, its breath hot on my neck. I could almost hear it calling my name again, that same hollow whisper, but I didn't dare look back. I finally broke through the trees and saw my car up ahead. I leapt in, started it up, and peeled out of there, not even stopping to catch my breath until I'd made it halfway home. I thought that'd be the end of it, that I could just forget about it and move on. But when I got home, things got weird. I couldn't sleep that night. It felt like I had this weight on me, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. By the next morning, I was burning up with a fever, the kind that makes you dizzy and leaves you sweating even when it's freezing. I figured it would pass in a day or two, but it didn't. For almost 2 weeks, I was stuck in bed, feverish and barely able to eat. Nothing seemed to help. My parents were worried sick, and eventually, I couldn't keep it in anymore. I told them everything. The buck, the whisper, that thing waving at me. I figured they'd think I was just imagining it, but instead my mom looked at me all serious and said she'd heard of things like this before. She called up this shaman she knew, someone who'd helped a few people in town with strange things over the years. The shaman came to our house that evening. This old man with a face full of lines and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything. He listened to my story without saying a word, nodding every now and then. After I was done, he turned to my parents and said, "We have to go to the place where it happened. That's the only way to help him." My stomach dropped when he said that. I didn't want to go back there, not after everything that happened. But I didn't have a choice. I was desperate to get better. So the next day, we all piled into my dad's truck. Me, my parents, and the shaman. The whole ride, I couldn't get rid of this feeling of dread. I just kept thinking about that buck lying there and that figure waving at me. Part of me wanted to turn back, but the fever had worn me down so much that I didn't have the energy to argue. We finally got to the spot, and as we stepped out of the truck, I felt this strange chill in the air, even though it was a warm day. We walked to the exact spot where I'd seen the buck lying down. The shaman looked around, taking in the area like he was seeing things I couldn't. I stood there, feeling queasy, when suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something, a shadow standing in the distance. I squinted, trying to make it out, but it was just too still. I couldn't be sure if it was even real. The shaman looked at me as if saying he saw it too. Then he knelt down and started spitting on the ground where the buck had been lying. Then he took an incense stick out of his bag, lit it, and stuck it into the dirt. He started chanting in this old language, a low, rhythmic sound that sent shivers down my body. The whole time I felt this pressure building in the air, like the forest itself was holding its breath. He kept going for a good half hour, shouting and chanting, and I just stood there, watching and hoping this was going to work. At one point, I glanced back to where I'd seen the shadow, and to my surprise, it looked like it was starting to fade, slowly melting away into the trees. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I could feel the relief washing over me, like a weight was finally lifting off my chest. When the shaman finally finished, he looked up at me, nodded and said, "It's done. Whatever you saw here, it's been sent back to where it belongs." That was the last time I saw or felt anything from that day. The fever broke the next morning and I started feeling like myself again. I don't know what it was I saw out there or why it happened, but I've learned my lesson. Since then, I've stayed far away from that part of the woods, and every time I go out hunting now, I make sure to stay close to home. I'd rather not take my chances with whatever might still be out there, watching and waiting. That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you did, check out more of my videos on the screens above or visit my channel for even more. Don't forget to subscribe for future updates. Stay safe and take care.